It's a Christmas miracle as we finally know what this Banjo-Kazooie refrigerator, as seen here from a beta version of DK64, was supposed to do, and as it turns out, it's all related to Stop and Swap. Hey everyone, Andre here, and we have to go over this treasure trove cove of information that just came out, all thanks to a recent tweet from Greg Males, who, as you probably know, worked at Rare up until this year, and was a lead designer in Banjo-Kazooie, Banjo-Tooie, and plenty of other games. And he, for whatever reason, just posted the full internal documents fully exposing how Stop and Swap was supposed to work. Now, in case you don't know, I'll give you a quick rundown, and that Stop and Swap is a feature planned for Banjo-Kazooie, Banjo-Tooie, and apparently DK64, and even more, as referred to the next N64 game, that would allow you to stop playing one game to swap in another and exchange items found in one into another game, including the infamous ice key, which is exactly what this fridge ties into. So going off the internal document, here's what was supposed to happen. Originally, you were going to take the ice key from Banjo-Kazooie and Stop and Swap it into DK64, where it would then be stored in this refrigerator, until Banjo-Tooie came out, at which point you would activate some kind of event at Banjo-Tooie, which then recreated this scene from DK64 showing the fridge opening, at which point you need to physically stop and swap back to DK64 in order to grab the key, then stop and swap again to bring the key into Banjo-Tooie. Now, once you had the key in Banjo-Tooie, you had to go over to Hailfire Peaks and find an ice safe, at which point you could open the safe using the ice key, at which point you would find not a Super Globo as in the final version of the game, but a Super Jiggy instead, which doesn't sound all that exciting, but here's what would happen. So once you find the Super Jiggy, bottles will pop up, congratulate you for finding it, and say that it must be pretty special, but if you find everything else in the game, the other 100 Jiggies, you might unlock a special reward, which as it turns out is a special outtakes ending, kind of like the ones you would find at the end of some Pixar movies like Toy Story 2, or even Donkey Kong 64, which sadly did not end up in the final version of Banjo-Tooie, and that would have been a lot of fun. Now, as to whether that was enough to justify all the effort of getting the ice key, I'm not entirely sure. However, there may have been even more uses for the ice key beyond this, which would have more justified its use, because they even teased that the ice key would reappear in a future N64 game, at which point you then have to stop and swap back to Banjo-Tooie in order to get the ice key out of here and put it back into whatever game came next. Now, obviously, that never ended up happening, so as far as we know, there were never actually any concrete plans for as to what the ice key would do next. So the mystery of the ice key has finally been resolved after all these years, which makes me very happy. But wait a second, what's this? That's right, this is the golden bust that was only found in a German player's guide for DK64, featuring a golden bust in this room, which never ended up in the final game. In fact, this room is basically completely empty in the final version of the game. But thanks to these documents, we finally know what that was about. So the original idea behind the golden bust was actually pretty similar to the ice key, in that in Banjo-Tooie you would do something, we don't know what, that would activate a cutscene showing a recreated area from DK64, specifically involving this bust inside a glass case. And you will see that glass case break, implying you can then collect it as DK in Donkey Kong 64, meaning you would stop and swap from this back to this, grab the golden bust, and bring it back into Banjo-Tooie, at which point you could then play as Donkey Kong and maybe even other characters from DK64 in Banjo-Tooie's multiplayer mode, which has actually been pretty freaking cool. A little bit like the lock-on technology from Sonic and Knuckles, allowing you to play as different characters in other games. At the least, it would have been way more interesting than the empty room we ended up with in DK64. What could have been? But get this, there was also another planned golden bust, this time a banjo to be found in Banjo-Tooie, which you could then stop and swap from Banjo-Tooie into the next N64 game, at which point it would serve some unknown purpose. Now, of course, none of that would be implemented at all, and I believe this is the first we've ever heard about this feature, because by the time Banjo-Tooie came out, they already knew stop and swap was a complete bust. And we're still not done, as we also have to talk about the mystery of these 6 eggs you could find in Banjo-Kazooie before bringing them over into Banjo-Tooie, or at least that was the plan. So here's how that was supposed to work. So originally in Banjo-Tooie, you would find 6 egg switches in Spiral Mountain, and when you reactivated one, it would show a cutscene of an area from Banjo-Kazooie and something changing, like a tomb door opening, which would then allow you to access that in Banjo-Kazooie. By then, of course, swapping back to Banjo-Kazooie, stop and swapping, grabbing the new egg that was just revealed through whatever switch you activated in Banjo-Tooie, then stop and swapping it back into Banjo-Tooie, at which point you would then take those eggs to Haggie's egg shed, and you could then open the the eggs there and it will give you some kind of special feature, which isn't entirely disclosed here. It may have matched up with what ended up happening in the final game, as you might recall, you actually could find some eggs at Banjo-Tooie, again by way of breaking the virtual Banjo-Kazooie cartridges, and then breaking those eggs at Hagi's Egg Shed, and that would unlock special features. So yeah, this all sounded amazing, and it crushes me as an adult still to find out how awesome this plan was going to be, because I remember even beating Banjo-Kazooie as a kid, and you see the ending where Mumble's showing you photos of things you can find in the game, like the eggs, and how those would come into play in Banjo-Tooie, and it sucked that it never happened. I was so disappointed. That might have been the main reason why I just didn't like Banjo-Tooie that much. It wasn't, but I want to say it is. Just because that was such an amazing idea and it was never implemented, and to find out it was going to be used in other games too, like DK64 and even subsequent games, really crushes me even as an adult. What an amazing idea that sadly never came to be, and it really makes me wish they just used the controller packs instead. Just save those items in the controller packs and you can bring them in that way, or go the lock-on technology route like Sonic and Knuckles if you had to. In any case, I have to give a shout out to Greg Mayles for finally revealing the full secrets of what this mode is intended to be, because it's so fun and interesting to find out what the intent was originally, all the way back to Banjo-Kazooie, and just sadly how it didn't pan out. And you know, I would love to see an idea like this deployed in future games, perhaps. I think there's still a great idea there, and I would love to see more of that. Although there's one more thing I should mention, is that the Xbox versions of these games, Banjo-Kazooie, Banjo-Tooie, and even Nuts and Bolts, actually did kind of fix this to a degree, in that it did implement some form of stop and swap, allowing you to bring items from one game into another. Now, sadly, the end result still wasn't nearly as exciting as this makes it sound, or as we envisioned as a kid, but the fact that they did kind of resolve it did make me, you know, somewhat happy. But you have to play the Xbox versions for that, and I think those are still around. Definitely check it out if you can, because you can at least get a little taste of what the intent was. On that note, everyone, that's all I got for you. It's amazing to finally see all this information, but not much more to say about it, which is surprising to say after decades of, you know, theorizing what was supposed to be. But that's all I got for you. Thanks for watching. We'll catch you later. Bye, everyone.